Greetings, everyone, and welcome to God Save the King. I am your host, Tim Keyes. I want to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, where you can hear my show every Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And as my manner is, very excited about today's show. I think we're going to discuss something today that's going to be of significant interest to many of my listeners and viewers. We're going to actually talk about potentially some end times theology here. Now, end times theology is something I'm very interested in, although I don't talk about it very often, simply because I have greater interest in other things. And those of you that have heard my show before, or frankly, those of you that have not heard my show before, God Save the King is primarily about the nativity and retelling the nativity story the way it really would have happened. And that is simply because, and I'm not trying to be pejorative here, it's because the traditional nativity story that we are all used to is actually just riddled with biblical and historical and scientific factual errors. It has taken on a life of its own, and it's become this thing called the Christmas play or the nativity play or the Christmas story. And I've talked about this in other episodes all the time that, you really shouldn't call it Christmas because it didn't happen on December 25th. Christmas is a word that was invented much later. And anyway, but God Save the King is predominantly about the nativity. But today we're going to talk about something entirely different. And what we're going to talk about, let me just dive right into it. Let's just start talking about it. What we are going to talk about is the Olivet Discourse. Okay. Now, what does that mean? What do I mean by the Olivet Discourse? Well, the Olivet Discourse traditionally, here we go with tradition again, right? The Olivet Discourse is traditionally understood as being Matthew chapters 24 and 25, Mark chapter 13, and then Luke chapters 21 and 22. This, if you get out a Bible dictionary or something like that, and you flip open and you look up the label Olivet Discourse, they're going to tell you most of the time, maybe somebody might get it right. Hint, 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 right? Most of the time, they're going to tell you that the Olivet Discourse is Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. Okay. But here's the question. Are these really the same record? That's what I just jumped right to it. I probably should have developed that a little more, but I just dove right into it. The question, so in academic circles, open up a Bible dictionary, commentary, something like that, look up the phrase Olivet Discourse. You're going to get most commentators saying that the Olivet Discourse is Matthew 24 and 25, Mark 13, and Luke 21 and 22, and that these are what are known as parallel records. Now, by parallel record, what that means is that they are separate records of the same events, and here's the key, and that any distinctions, any variations are insignificant. They're not significant enough to warrant labeling these records as actually separate records. Okay, so let me say that again. Let's say that again. In scholastic circles, academic circles, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Mark 24 and following, Mark 13 and then Luke 21 are what are known as the Olivet Discourse, and they are what are known as parallel records. And what a parallel record means, what parallel record implies in the Gospels, is that they are separate records of the same events or same incident from a different perspective. Like one is through the eyes of Matthew, one is through the eyes of Peter, and one is through the eyes of Luke, right? So it's a different perspective, but that any variation or distinction between the records is insignificant because it is simply a separate record of the same event. Now, what I want you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is I want you to make up your own mind. I'm going to present the evidence that I'm going to suggest to you that no, they're not parallel records. I'm going to suggest to you that Matthew and Mark are parallel. That if you do a side-by-side column A, column B comparison of Matthew 24 and 25 and Mark 13, you're going to go, yep, parallel record. There's not enough distinction to go, wow, yeah, these are the same. There's really not much distinction whatsoever, right? However, if you compare Matthew 24 and 25 to Luke 21 and 22, and you do a side-by-side A-B comparison, I believe you're going to look at those and go, uh-oh, wait a second. Maybe these are not parallel records. Maybe these are truly independent, distinct, separate records of different events. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, there's extensive similarity between the two. And frankly, I think that's the point. I think that's God's point. I don't know that Matthew and or Luke necessarily knew this at the time they were writing it. But after a fashion, I kind of think the Holy Spirit is going, watch this, right? I'm going to make these records close enough that if you don't pay attention, you're not going to notice. However, that's the point. If you do pay attention and you do put them together side by side, column A, column B, you're going to go, uh-oh, wait, time out. Matthew 24 says this, Luke 21 says this, and wow, maybe they're not the same. See, and this has significant implications. Now, like I said, and I'm going to repeat myself, I'm going to say this over and over again. I want you to make up your own mind, okay? I'm not necessarily here to persuade you, not necessarily. Now, like I said, my opinion is going to show through. My opinion is that they are separate, okay? So there you go. There's the bias up front, but that's because I have done an in-depth comparison of these records and determined that I believe they are separate, that they are not, and that therefore, frankly, what you're going to see here is that Luke 21 actually should not be called the Olivet Discourse because, for one thing, it didn't take place on the Mount of Olives. That's why Matthew 24 is and Mark 13 are supposedly called the Olivet Discourse, is because that is where it happened. That's the point. That's where it happened. And therefore you go, okay, right? And then here you go, because of the similarities, because there are some, right? Because of the similarities, people have just assumed that Luke 21 is the same record and have never done a detailed side-by-side comparison to help themselves determine, are they genuinely parallel records or are they actually distinct records? So there is the hypothesis that I am bringing to you today, and we are going to take a detailed look at this. We're going to read the records. I'm going to put up some charts, some graphics that are going to help you see what I believe is the distinction between the two records. So let's start, right? So this would actually start by having to very carefully read a couple of records. So let me see if I can screen share here, and let's look at a couple of records, right? So if we go to, come on, there we go. Oh, I want that. That's what we want. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so let's take a look at this. So this is Matthew chapter 24, verse 1, reading from the English Standard Version. We read Matthew 24:1. Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these things, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Okay, now wait a second. Time out here, guys. My fault. Let me take a look here. Let's get going. Come on, come on. There we go. It's actually, we're after verse 3. So then in verse 3, it says, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Okay, so now let us switch over to Luke. Okay, got to do this again. Switch over to Luke chapter 21. Come on, baby. Let's go here. Same thing. Luke chapter 21, verses 1 and following. Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow. Come on. There we go. I'm sorry. Jump to verse 5. Just go straight to verse 5. And while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings, he said, as for these things that you see, the days will come that there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. See, so there's the similarity, right? On both of these occasions, Jesus prophesies the destruction of the temple, right? But take note how in Matthew 24, he is on the Mount of Olives, but here in Luke 21, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts in the offering box. Where is he? He's not on the Mount of Olives. He is in the temple, is where he is, right? And if you jump down to verse 7, and they asked him, teacher, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when these things are about to take place, right? And then he begins to answer them. And then when you read the following several verses, again, you see similarity, because he starts talking about how nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there's going to be earthquakes and things like that. So there's a lot of similarity. He prescribes and prophesies the destruction of the temple, and he prescribes and talks about, you know, wars and rumors of wars and nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom, right? But like I said, what I want to point out to you is that I think there are greater distinctions here than there are similarities. So what you want to do is you want to read Matthew 24 and 25 and Luke 21 and 22 side by side, slowly and carefully, and I believe you will see the same distinctions that I am about to point out. So now let's talk about set of distinct comparison number one. I'm going to put up a graphic here. I want you to see comparison number one, and I'm going to show you how this works. Okay. Now, what's going on here, pardon me, is you've got two records, Matthew 24 and Luke 21, and then we have three categories. So you'll notice on the graphic that it says the record, right? Then the audience, the location, and then the nature of the record, right? And you'll notice that one record is Matthew 24, the second record is Luke 21, and then here we go. Let's talk about this. So in Matthew 24, the audience is Jesus's disciples. In Luke 21, the audience is the people. So that's not the same thing. Now, if this were the only distinction, okay, then maybe you might be able to go, okay, wait a second, time out. Okay, his disciples, the people, okay, right? But look at this. The audience in Matthew 24 is his disciples, and it says that they came to him privately, see? So, and then the location of the record is the Mount of Olives. And then the nature of the record in Matthew 24 is that it is a private briefing. He is only speaking with his disciples. It is not a public discourse, which is what is going on in Luke 21. Okay, so you've got pretty darn significant comparisons already, and this is just graphic number one. So the audience in Matthew 24 is Jesus' disciples. The audience in Luke 21 is the people. The location in Matthew 24 is the Mount of Olives, and then the location in Luke 21 is the temple. Then the nature of the discourse in Matthew 24 is that it is a private briefing, and then the nature of the discourse in Luke 21 is that it is a public discourse. Okay, so already you have pretty darn significant distinctions in what's going on here. But let's continue our comparison. Let's keep reading. Let's go back to Matthew. So now this time, what I want you to do is I want you to compare Matthew 24 and Luke 21 again. This time we're going to compare Matthew 24:15 with Luke 21:20. So here we go. Give me a sec to click the right buttons, as I've said more than once. Matthew 24. Here we go. And let me scroll down so you can get there. So here you go. Matthew 24, verse 15, right here, guys. So Jesus, in context here in Matthew 24, Jesus' disciples have asked him for the signs of his coming and the end of the age, and he tells them, right? He begins to give them a private briefing, and he tells them what's going on. So look what he says here. He says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, and then in parentheses, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not come down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Now, the focus for the moment, however, is verse 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains. Okay, so now let's switch over, okay, and look at Luke 21, and we are going to look at verse 20. Okay, so here we go. We're in Luke 21. Get down to verse 20. Here you go. Here you go. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are the days of vengeance to fulfill all that is written. Alas, for women who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days. So once again, take note of the similarity. There's a lot of similarity. There's talk about nursing mothers and those who are pregnant. There's talking about fleeing into the wilderness, to not stick around Jerusalem, but to get out of Dodge and to go someplace else. So once again, I'm not denying for 1 second that there is significant similarities, but there are also very significant distinctions. And once again, I think these distinctions are frankly more than enough for us to make the conclusion, to reach the conclusion, okay, to take the decision that these are not the same record. So let's go to another graphic that I made up. Take a look at this. I want comparison. Let's do comparison number 1 again real quick. So here you go. Comparison number 1. In Matthew 24, the audience is Jesus's disciples. In Luke 21, the audience is the people. In Matthew 24, did I say that right? Matthew 24, the location is the Mount of Olives. The location of the discourse is the Mount of Olives. Luke 21, the location is in the temple. Okay. Matthew 24, it's a private briefing only for his disciples. Luke 21, it is a public discourse for anyone who is there. So now let's look at the next graphic. Like I said, let's go to comparison number 2. Same kind of idea here, right? Both, see, and so back to the similarities for a second. Both records speak of, they both use the word desolation. Okay. See, and that's the reason a lot of people look at these records and go, oh, see, they're the same. It uses the same word, desolation, right? But in Matthew 24, we are told that it is the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel. Okay. So in other words, you can go back to the record in Daniel where Daniel prophesies this and contrast and compare and say, oh, okay, this is the fulfillment of the prophecy by Daniel, right? So Matthew 24, verse 15, it's called the abomination of desolation. But in Luke 21, in verses 20 and following, we are told that it is the desolation of Jerusalem. Not the same phrase. Not the same phrase, guys. It's not the same phrase. Then take note that the location, when you read Matthew 24 carefully, and it speaks of the abomination of desolation, it tells you where it occurs. It says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, stand in the holy place. So in other words, that's the temple. The holy place is in the temple. So whatever this thing is, whatever the abomination of desolation is, it takes place not only at the temple, but within the temple, in the holy place, right? Whereas if you compare Luke 21, verse 20 and following, the desolation of Jerusalem, you will see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. Then you will know that its desolation has come near, right? So, and then as you continue to read, and it talks about let those who are in Judea flee into the mountains, etc., you notice that the desolation of Jerusalem, the place that it happens is, frankly, the entire city of Jerusalem. It's not a hyper-specific location within Jerusalem. It's the entire city. Okay? So side-by-side comparison, Matthew 24, Luke 21. Matthew 24 is the abomination of desolation. Luke 21 is the desolation of Jerusalem. Matthew 24, where it happens, is in the holy place. Luke 21, where it happens, is the entire city of Jerusalem. And then, very important, Matthew references Daniel as a prophecy that is being fulfilled. So in other words, is it citing a reference point, and specifically, is it citing Daniel as a reference? The record in Matthew, the answer to that is yes. The record in Luke, the answer to that is no. Luke does not reference this as a fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel. So be very careful here, right? When you do your own study, be very careful. Now, like I said several times already, I want you to make up your own mind. I want you to read these records and compare side by side, and then you get to decide, are these truly parallel records, or are these actually distinct records of distinct events? You get to decide, okay? But look at the distinctions, that we have seen thus far. Let's go back to number 1. Here we go. The audience is Jesus' disciples in Matthew 24. It's the people in Luke 21. The location is the Mount of Olives in Matthew 24. The location is the temple in Luke 21. The nature of the discourse is that it is a private briefing in Matthew 24 and that it's a public discourse in Luke 21. Then if we move on to the next set of features, we notice that the desolation that is in view is the quote-unquote abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, but it's the desolation of Jerusalem in Luke 21. We notice that the location of this event is extremely specific. It's in the holy place in the temple in Jerusalem in Matthew 24, but it's frankly the entire city of Jerusalem in Luke 21. And then we take note that in in Matthew 24, Daniel is cited as a reference, but in Luke 21, Daniel is not cited as a reference. Okay? So, in my opinion here, we are stacking up a pretty good list of distinctions between the two records to demonstrate that they are not the same. So now let's continue on. And this one gets pretty darn important here. What we are going to look at next is Matthew 24, verses 16 through 21, and then Luke chapter 21, verses 21 through 24. Okay, we actually kind of already read them, but I want to re-emphasize them now. So let's go back to Matthew 24, and then let's look, like I said, let's look at verses 16 through 21, right? Here we go. Matthew 24, verses 16 through 21. Let me get it on the screen so you can read it. Beginning right about here, you can see my cursor. It says, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. Let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas, for the women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for then there will be great tribulation, such has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be." Okay? Very important, because now we are going to go back to Luke and reread that. And I mean, and you know what I'm driving at here, ladies and gentlemen, because I've tipped my hand. But now I want to go back and I want to reread Luke 21, verses 21 through 24. So if you, once again, look at my cursor, let's get it on there. Come on, there we go. There we go, right about here, right? Beginning in verse 21, "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, to fulfill all that is written." Interesting statement. "Alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days. For there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people." Interesting. Very, very interesting. "And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Okay, so you know what I'm going to do here? We're going to compare these side by side. So let's get the next comparison up here. This is comparison number 3. So once again, the target audience, once again, is Jesus's disciples in Matthew 24, but it's the people in Luke 21, right? Now, I'm actually going to take the time to go back and look at this. I'm going to point it out here on the graphic, and then we'll actually go back to these things go back to these records in Luke 24, Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and point them out. This is a very important distinction because we are in both records, Jesus defines and describes when these things will occur. When these things will occur. And what you can see here in Matthew 24 is that the record actually says after these things. And then in Luke 21, it actually says before these things. Okay, so let's take the time here to go back and look carefully at this. Let's go back to Matthew 24. Here we go. Let's find it. Hang on one moment, guys. This is important, so we definitely want to take a good look at it. All right, so we're back in Matthew 24. When you see the abomination, let those last great tribute now. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I should have had this ready to go for you. And we have the notorious dead space here. That's death in radio, right? Jump down to verse 29, where it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall from heaven, right? So in Matthew 24, it describes a time of great affliction and a time of great tribulation. But then notice it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light and stars will fall from heaven, right? So now go to Luke. Go to Luke 21, right? Same concept here. Here you go. So, verse 25, and there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth distress of nations and perplexity because of the roaring of the sea and the waves, people fainting with fear, and with foreboding of what is coming to the world. For the powers of heaven will be shaken. And then, right, see? So this is where, this is similarity, right? Okay, this is similarity. It appears that it's talking about the same thing, okay? But let me find it here because this is critically important, right? Sorry about this, ladies and gentlemen. I was a little bit unprepared for this, and I shouldn't have been. There we go. Right, here we go. Here we go. It's actually all the way back up in verse 12. Luke 21, verse 12, it says, but before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. Right? So let's, because I kind of fumbled this, ladies and gentlemen, let's take the time to do this right. Luke 21, 12. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. Okay, so now let's go back to Matthew 24. Okay. Because we looked at verse 29, right? Immediately after the tribulation of those days. But I think I'm actually looking for, right? It's all the way back up in verse 9, right? Because what happens is in both records, in the early part of the record, Jesus gives these similar descriptions of nation against nation and, general trouble and calamity and tribulation, right? And like we just noted, he says in Luke 21:12, before these things, they will deliver you up before kings and governors and etc. But now look at Matthew 24. That general description is in verses 1-8. And then in verse 9, it says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my namesake. So what I'm driving at here is comparison chart number 3, right? In comparison chart number 3 here, we notice that, once again, the target audience is Jesus' disciples in Matthew 24, but it's the people in Luke 21. In Matthew 24, the target audience is told, after these things, you will be delivered up, right? In Luke 21, the target audience is told, before these things, you will be delivered up. Then, very important, in the record in Matthew, we are told that this will be a time of trouble. The nature of the trouble is going to be affliction and death. In other words, that you're going to die for this, okay? Whereas in Luke 21, we're told more about persecution and prison. Now, are people going to die? Probably, yes, in Luke 21. And as a matter of fact, giving away the answer here, what we're driving at here. So let's just go there now. Since this has been building and building and building, let me kind of give you the punchline at this point. I think you've got 2 separate records here. And very simply, I think you've got one that has already happened historically, and I think you have one that has yet to happen historically, right? And that's the great debate, or one of the primary debates in end times theology, is over this thing called preterism. As a matter of fact, let's just take the time. Let's just do it right now. Here we go. So, preterism. Oh, do I not have that one ready to go? I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see if I can make this happen quickly here. Let's do this, this. Come on. God darn it. Come on. There we go. Let's see if that worked. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Here we go. Take a look at your screen. This is the definition of something called preterism. Preterism is the belief that most, if not all, and there's different forms of preterism. Some preterists believe that all biblical prophecy has been fulfilled, right? From my experience, and it's just from my experience, most preterists believe that most biblical prophecy has been fulfilled, and that makes this whole argument really wonky because then you've got an out, frankly, is what this is. But preterism is the belief that most, if not all, prophetic events described in the Bible have already taken place, primarily during the 1st century at the destruction of the temple. So in other words, what we're talking about here is these records. A preterist, someone who believes in preterism, believes that the events described, here you go, this is the key. A preterist believes that the events described in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 the vast majority of them, maybe there's one or two itty bitty ones that haven't happened yet, but that the vast majority of them, if not all of them, occurred in the 1st century and were fulfilled by the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 AD, right? And you will hear. So here's what you want to listen for. Be very careful. Listen for this whenever you hear an end times discussion. Listen for the teacher to say or write or whatever that the events of Matthew 24 were fulfilled in the 1st century. That's the key phrase you want to listen for, because in my opinion, that's wrong. That is incorrect. It's biblically incorrect. Now, take note, if he says the events of Luke 21 were fulfilled in the 1st century, now he's correct, because that's what you've got going on here. Plain and simple, what you've got going on here is that Luke 21 was a prophecy by Jesus. Here you go. By Jesus in the temple to the people, that the temple would be destroyed and that Jerusalem would be destroyed, and that it was going to happen, frankly, within about 40 years. See, it was going to happen for many of them. It was going to happen in their lifetime. Okay. So in my opinion, Luke 21 is a record of something that has already happened. It is a prophecy and then a fulfillment of prophecy of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and then frankly also the destruction of Jerusalem in 135. Okay, so in my opinion, Luke 21 has already occurred. It's Matthew 24 that has not. And it's because of the distinctions that I am showing you is how I'm able to reach this distinction, that I don't think Matthew 24 has happened yet. I don't think it's possible that it could have happened yet, because it is describing much, much, much more than Luke 21 is describing. So now let me go back to that graphic one more time here. Let's get to comparison number 3. So if you get back to comparison number 3, what we're looking at here is, once again, the target audience in Matthew 24 is Jesus' disciples. In Luke 21, it's the people. We are told in Matthew 24 that after these things, there will come great affliction and death. Lots of people are going to die, okay? It is estimated based upon other records, when you cross-reference Matthew 24 with the book of Revelation, when you cross-reference it with other end times prophecies from the Old Testament, that up to 1/3 of the earth's population is going to die during what is known as the Great Tribulation at the end of the age. But in Luke 21, the emphasis is not on death. The emphasis is on persecution and prison. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean there's no death, but it's not emphasized like it is in Matthew 24. Okay. So before I get to the final point here, let's one more time, let's go through all of the graphics. Let's look at comparison number 1. So back to comparison number 1. Matthew 24, the audience is Jesus' disciples. In Luke 21, it's the people. Matthew 24, the disciples. Luke 21, the people. The location, Matthew 24, the Mount of Olives. Luke 21, the location is the temple. The nature of the discourse, Matthew 24, it's a private briefing. Luke 21, it's a public discourse. Comparison chart number 2. The desolation that is in view, Matthew 24, is the abomination of desolation. Luke 21, it's the desolation of Jerusalem. The precise location, according to Matthew 24, is the holy place within the temple, within the city. In Luke 21, it's the entire city. In Matthew 24, we are given Daniel as a precedent. In Luke 21, we are not given Daniel as a precedent. Okay. Now comparison number 3 that we just looking at it again very quickly here. Here we go. Once again, target audience, Matthew 24, the disciples, Luke 21, the people. We are told in Matthew 24 that after these things occur, there will be great affliction and death. And yet in Luke 21, we are told before these things occur, there will be great persecution and imprisonment. Okay, so what I'm doing here, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, is I am building my case that these are actually separate records entirely. Separate records entirely, right? So now, one last time, let's actually go to the records in Luke, in Luke and in Matthew, and read one final critical distinction in my book. So here we go. Let's get back to Matthew. And if we look at Matthew here, find my cursor, scroll down. Once again, abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And then when you get down here to, this is very important, verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Okay? So the point here, as a matter of fact, we almost don't even really have to go to Luke 21, but let's go there anyway. Let's go back to Luke 21. So when we get to Luke 21, he says, for there will be great distress. I am actually in verse 23. Alas, for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. For there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That's actually another distinction, by the way. Luke 21 talks about the times of the Gentiles. Matthew 24 does not. Okay? That's because when the events in Luke 21 occur, the fulfillment, the times of the Gentiles are not being fulfilled at that time. That's actually a prophetic statement about the future still, right? Read it carefully. They will fall by the edge of the sword and be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled, right? And so that occurred in 135 AD was when Jerusalem was trampled underfoot, and it didn't exist. I actually don't know exactly when Jerusalem began to be rebuilt as a city, but it was, we know that the nation of Israel was essentially non-existent from this time until the 20th century. Okay. And that's why this is such a big argument in the field of end times prophecy, is that, once again, are these records the same or are they distinct? That's what everybody is arguing about. Because, see, if they're the same, right, if these are identical records, then, see, that's why the preterists can make the claim that they were all fulfilled. Now, I don't think that makes sense. I'm sorry, when I look at these two records and I look at the record in Matthew 24 and I see the distinctions and I see this final distinction, which, let me get this up here on the board here, because this is the final distinction, and I believe that this one is hypercritical. Because Matthew 24 makes the statement that there never was tribulation like this before and that there would never be again. Matthew makes that distinction. Luke 21 does not. And all you've got to do, frankly, I know it's a simplistic argument, but it's true. All you've got to do is look at World War II and the Holocaust, because World War II and the Holocaust was far worse than Luke 21. Okay? It's not worse than Matthew 24. And therefore, Matthew 24 can't be describing what happened in the first century. It just can't be. Also, if you look around, okay, if you simply look around today, right? Because the reason end times theology is such an important subject right now is because it's happening right in front of your face, okay? It's happening right in front of your face. What we are geared, see, because I believe Matthew 24 hasn't happened yet, okay? And like I just said, Matthew 24 describes tribulation and desolation against Jerusalem, Israel, Jerusalem, and the Jewish people like has never happened before. Okay? Now, those are some dark words. Let me repeat that. Matthew 24 describes tribulation, persecution, affliction, and desolation against Israel, Jerusalem, the temple, and the Jewish people like has never occurred before. Okay? Now, if you want to try to place that in the first century, be my guest. I don't think you can. Okay? It's coming. It's coming. It hasn't happened yet. And all you've got to do is look around you and look at anti-Semitism on the rise like crazy and go, oh my word, it is coming, it is coming, it is coming. And part of what we are seeing as well is the fact that the greatest friend to the Jewish people right now are all the evangelical Christians in the world. All the conservative, Bible-believing, small e evangelical Christians around the world are Israel's best friend right now. Okay? We're the ones looking out for Israel because we know this is coming. We know this is coming. So this is why end times prophecy is so important. This is why I have taken the time to share this with you today, is I want you to be informed. Now, like I keep saying, I want you to make your own decision. I'm not going to sit here and twist your arm and force you to believe something. And like I said, my decision, my opinion has clearly shown through. I cannot see these as parallel records. I see them as two distinct records. I believe that Luke 21 was fulfilled in the first century, but I believe that Matthew 24 hasn't happened yet, right? And one last thing I want to point out to you is that you notice how both records tell those who are Judea to flee to the mountains, right? In Luke 21, the reference is to everybody. It's anybody and everybody in Jerusalem, not just the Jews. Okay? Now, it was predominantly a Jewish city, but there would have been Gentiles who lived there. But nonetheless, the warning was for everybody to get out of Jerusalem. The warning in Matthew 24 is for observant Jews to get out of Jerusalem, not everybody. It says, take note, it says, take heed that your flight not be in winter nor on the Sabbath day. Well, the only person that warning is going to matter to is an observant Jew. It's not going to matter to a Muslim. It's not going to matter to a Christian. It's only going to matter to an observant Jew. So you've got a very, very interesting record in Matthew 24 because this is Jesus giving instructions to his disciples at the end of the age, and yet these disciples also appear to be observant Jews. So what the heck does that mean? Since when do modern observant Jews heed the instructions of Jesus of Nazareth, who they deny is their Messiah? Now, there's a good question. Maybe we'll answer that in a future episode. Now, we're about to wrap it up here, ladies and gentlemen. I want to let you know that you can get a copy of this article in a couple of different ways. Number one, I have posted this on one of my older websites, and it's still there. And that is a website called End of Religion, www.endofreligion.org. Okay. That is an old website of mine. It's still up and running. And this article comparing Matthew 24 and Luke 21 is on that website. So you can find it there. Number 2, if you want to email me at contact.godsavetheking@gmail.com, that's contact.godsavetheking@gmail.com, I will email you a PDF copy of this article for your own library, for your reference, that will step you through this whole thing, show you all the comparisons, all that kind of stuff, and you can have it for your records, and that way you can study it on your own. So that is another way for you to get it. And then finally, by the time this show gets posted to my YouTube channel, I will also put it on the God Save the King website, so that you will be able to partake of the God Save the King version of this article on the GodSaveTheKing.org website, www.godsavetheking.org. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have a whole lot of time left. I'm going to take the few moments that we have to thank you for joining me on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Very important subject. It just really struck me that I needed to get this out there, because there is so much conversation about end times going on right now. And I'm not going to change the focus of my show. The focus of my show is mostly going to be on the nativity, but every once in a while, I am going to throw in something like this. All right. So we'll catch you next time. God save the King.